Hello and welcome to Unstressed. My name is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Now, before we start, I would like to pay my respects, acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which I am recording this podcast. That is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters and culture. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Now, today's episode, we are diving into a bit of therapy. So today, my guest is Jackie Stone, therapist, counsellor who deals with stress, anxiety, depression, outlines some of the coping mechanisms and some of the strategies to deal with it. And in this episode, we talk a lot about some of the challenges, not just to us, but to our children, our whole story of how we interact with the devices that we find ourselves with in the palms of our hands. And this is a great episode for raising our awareness about that, but also a great episode for getting a bit of insight into what it is like being a therapist and some of the strategies that you can use to overcome some issues which may just be spinning around in your head in a not in a very constructive way. Anyway, I won't say any more than that. I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Jackie Stone. Welcome to the show, Jackie.
Thanks, Ron. Good to be here.
Jackie, stress is something that we hear a lot about. This program is actually called Unstress, a little play on words about understanding stress. But I wondered if you might just share with us what you see most people understand as being stressed.
Sure. So I think, and this comes largely from my practice and experience, hands on deck with people suffering from stress and talking about stress and the reading I do around it. I think the key thing is, these days that I notice is a sense of overwhelm. People are stressed in their lives because we are crazy busy these days and our days are jam-packed. There's the same number of hours, but we seem to squeeze more into them. I think, our lives online contribute to that enormously. We didn't have to deal with so many providers. We didn't have so many bills. We didn't have so many things that could go wrong with this device, that device, this connection, that connection. And I think it's all part of it, as well as our busy lives. So overwhelm is probably the big word that I would use for what people are struggling with.
Yes, well, I mean, that in itself, I remember seeing a film recently that was set in the 1980s, and the most amazing thing about it was there was no computers. There was actually somebody was struggling to find a phone to make a phone call, had to find a phone booth and get change to put into that phone booth. Now we've got it, we've got little computers in our hands, yes. And how are people reacting to that kind of overwhelm?
So I think it's the thing that strikes me is a sense of helplessness. And interestingly, I mean, we can get into this if it arises, but helplessness is often what underpins trauma.
Right.
And traumatic experiences. So I won't make too much of that, except to say that it is not good for us. We are not well built to handle and cope with a sense of helplessness, and the overwhelm and stress that people are experiencing has them sometimes tip into this sense of helplessness. They feel out of control. I guess that's the way that, in fact, helplessness is probably my word. People most commonly speak themselves of feeling out of control.
But helplessness is an interesting one because we did a program a few weeks ago on trauma, and helplessness, and the two words. And I know you haven't, we talked about this before we came on, and it's so interesting because I know you haven't listened to it, and I'm not going to hold that against you, Jackie. But they were two words, interestingly, that Sarah Woodhouse used as well: overwhelm and helplessness.
Right.
Yeah. And how is that affecting people? Well, I mean, two words that come to mind that you must see all the time is depression and anxiety.
So this is the problem with the way that we are living with so much stress. It's that I just see society on the edge of anxiety and depression. It's a huge risk that we carry with us living with so much stress, because this is what happens. When something bigger goes wrong, we so easily tip into anxiety and depression. So it doesn't take a lot to get from one to the other. We can sustain stress or stressful living for a time. And of course, you know all the physical and medical implications of that. But for instance, some people will experience in stress worry and rumination, and that can tip us into anxiety and depression. So this is where it becomes, well, I guess I use the word carefully, but more pathological. You know, once we've tipped over into from stress into anxiety and depression, then we're dealing with a condition that needs to be addressed very intentionally. They tend not to lift without making some effort, without seeking some professional assistance or making significant changes in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things about the experience of being in therapy. I mean, I've had that experience on 2 or 3 occasions in my life, and there's something very cathartic about coming into someone's office who you don't know. Well, no, you don't know them, and they're not friends and they're not family, so there's no baggage here, and you're having to explain something about how you feel to someone who you haven't met. That in itself is a very cathartic experience.
It is cathartic. It's also anxiety-provoking for most people.
Right.
But this is part of therapy. Part of therapy is doing the courageous thing, and it is having a therapist help you to create a safe space and facilitate your sitting with your feelings and sitting with what arises and supporting you in working through that in a healthy, constructive way.
Yes.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
It's a very, I mean, it's an interesting relationship, isn't it? Because the vulnerability of the person sitting there is clear.
Yes.
They otherwise wouldn't be there.
Yes.
Is that something you need to assess really quickly? How vulnerable is this person?
Absolutely. And so I think this is going to be a really useful term. A lot to do with stress, anxiety, depression, therapy, all of what we're talking about here. It's all about emotional regulation. So, and you know, we can draw those analogies between how we process, digest, and regulate physically, our nutrition, all of that sort of thing. Likewise, we're less aware of it, but we are constantly being bombarded by stimulus and experience, and we need to process that, and we need to digest, and we need to regulate ourselves emotionally. And people can do that in a healthy and constructive way, or a destructive way, or a less helpful way. So on your phone, reach for the bottle. There are healthy ways too outside of therapy, of course. walking, exercising, speaking with a trusted friend, meditation, going for a walk without looking down at the phone, but being in nature. All of these things are more healthy ways of regulating our emotions. But these days, we've barely got time to scratch ourselves. And if you think about it, no one, I mean, kids wouldn't have a clue. None of us these days wait at the bus stop with our thoughts, with our feelings. Barely anyone sits in a restaurant between ordering their meal and waiting for it to come. They're on their phones. So we are out of practice with emotional regulation, with processing thoughts and feelings. We're just constantly distracting.
Yes, because I was going to ask about, because we hear so much about getting in touch with your feelings, and clearly the experience in therapy is all about that. How do we, getting rid of media is one thing.
Yes.
But getting in touch with your feelings is easier said than done. What apart from getting rid of the technology, what are some strategies that people can use before they come into the therapist?
A really good question. So, and this will be different for different people. So some people almost are hypersensitive or over access, and their feelings come very readily. They are triggered or aroused and their emotions overwhelm them. I think we're talking about the rest of us. And so at the other extreme, there are many of us these days who are out of touch with their feelings. There's a disconnect between themselves and their feelings, even between themselves and their sensations in the body. So the first thing to try is to tune in and feel what you can feel at a sensory level. It's an excellent way into better emotional regulation and reconnecting with our feelings and emotions. And I will say this in the consulting room. When you say that, can you tell me what do you feel? And they look at me blankly. What do you mean? And I said, well, can you find a sensation in the body that goes with that thought? And it's normally about a struggle, whether they're talking about a relationship or they're talking about something that's going on at work, whatever it might be. I'll say, where's this registering? Because we ought to be connected with our physical self and feel. Do we feel the tightness in the chest, that may go with a bit of anxiety or nerves? Do we feel it in the pit of our stomach, something that's weighing down on us or concerning us? Is it tension in the jaw you'll be familiar with, which might be about frustration or anger or holding something back, and so forth. So a really good way in is to just take some time to register what's going on inside at a sensory level.
Yeah, wow. Well, yes, that's something we do so little of. The other coping mechanisms you mentioned, I mean, what are some of the more destructive coping mechanisms that people use?
Yes. So there are many. One of the most common, of course, will be alcohol and other substances. And the difficulty here is that in our society, it is, I was going to say acceptable, but almost socially unacceptable not to drink.
Yes.
It is widely and readily available, and the corporates that are still providing Friday night drinks free, it's really, really difficult for people to say no And it's very easy for people to get into the habit of unwinding with a drink. You know, they get home and crack a bottle of wine, and for many people, there will be not a drop left by the end of dinner. And it's really concerning. So this is a destructive way of regulating emotions. It's numbing. Yeah.
And the other one is kids. Kids are not really escaping this problem either. I'm quite alarmed to hear about the impact of mental health in kids. What are you seeing? What sort of problems are you seeing?
So I cannot not mention the screens again. So this is a child of the current day. This is their means of emotional regulation, is turning to the screen. So they're not waiting anywhere now for anything. They just pick up their screen and distract.
Yes.
And they feel frustrated, they feel upset. They're not sitting with that at all. They are just going online and finding a funny video to distract themselves and get them out of anything that feels bad. Of course, the online environments are also contributing to the problems because of, all sorts of issues like self-image and everybody posting the best version of themselves online and nothing else. It's very problematic, and it's the immediacy, the accessibility that is such a problem, because there's no wait for anything. They just pick up their phone and they can access anything that they want.
I mean, I think I've observed, because, as you know, I've got some grandchildren, and those grandchildren are 5 and 2, and even at that early age, I would say to my family, I say one of the biggest challenges, in fact, arguably the biggest challenge, is how to regulate technology. And I know your kids are older, teenagers. So how do you approach that as a parent, knowing all that you know? How do you do that? How do you regulate that with kids?
So a few key elements. Number one, start with yourself. Parents need to be looking at the modelling that they're providing for their children. If the parents can't get off their phones, then the problem is much bigger. And it's significant. And, of course, that's where it starts, because the children will see that their parents don't have any self-restraint with their phone, that it is always by their side, and so it's normalised. And so that's all that they know. So this is a significant problem. And look, I have clients in my room. I've had some new mothers struggling not to look at their phone even when they're breastfeeding during the night. It's and it's heartbreaking, and they know that there's something wrong with that. And in fact, it's becoming more common for people to come and say, I recognise I've got a problem with this. And likewise, it's even people, so it used to be only people who, well, everyone seems to work globally these days, but people in jobs where they are working with colleagues in different time zones, it seems to be even worse. That's where it started. People would tell me that they couldn't help themselves but check their email if they got up during the night to go to the bathroom. Yeah. So, and I say this because it's really important for people to hear and hopefully react as you just did. This cannot, we need to keep a hold of the fact that this is not normal or healthy. Otherwise, we're all doomed. We've got to keep reacting with shock. because otherwise we're not going anywhere with this. We need to recognise that it's not normal for each family member to have their phone beside them as they're eating dinner. And I actually try really hard with my kids. I regularly will not answer my phone. I regularly will hear it beep with a message and not look at it. And they'll look around and say, "Mum, your phone." And I'll say, "Yes, and?" So that they can see that we have a choice. We've got to put ourselves back in the driver's seat with technology. I would suggest to everybody that they turn every notification possible off. And then immediately they're back in the driver's seat. So you can access social media. I know that there's a lot of good in social media, but only if you're in the driver's seat and you log in when you choose to, because it's the right time for you to check out what's going on. It ought not be driven by the technology. Now, this is feeding into part of this out of control, helpless feeling. We've got to live more intentionally, and that's the whole mindfulness thing. But back to the kids. So it's the modelling first.
Yep.
And then there are all sorts of regulations, routines, restrictions that we need to put in place. And I would highly recommend to every family that they do the research and choose whichever device, app or restrictions are available to them. I've only recently updated what we use, and it's an app that enables me to first put the controls in place so that my children cannot access anything to do with, weapons and porn and gambling and all those sorts of things that children shouldn't even be accidentally able to access. And then there are the routines. So I can set when their devices go to sleep at night. I can't access them during the night. And this is partly about family relationships as well. I am tired of policing it, and I don't want the aggro that goes with constantly nagging. So it is all electronically done now.
So this is an app on their phone?
Yes, on my phone.
On your phone as well?
As well as theirs. So I have had to, there was a lot of discussion. I had to sell it to them, that this is about them not having to listen to me constantly nagging. And I said, it is all up for negotiation. We can discuss when it goes off. And I can drive it so specifically that there is, for instance, an hour and a half or whatever it might be for my almost 16-year-old daughter who cannot access TikTok or Snapchat during the time she would normally be doing homework. So you can tailor it that specifically.
Yes. Wow, that is just, I didn't know, I'm not in that demographic anymore, but that is a really, and the grandchildren haven't got their own phones yet, which is,
thank goodness.
You'll be pleased to know that, Jackie.
Yes, it is a relief.
Haven't got their own phone, but I can see my 5-year-old granddaughter. It's not far away.
Yes, that's right.
But that is that is good to hear. That is good to hear because, for it to be a family app that you're in control of is critical. What's the name of that app? Do you remember what it is?
So this one in particular is called Family Zone.
Family Zone. Okay, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
But of course, the challenge is the kind of fear of missing out.
Yes.
Because did you see yesterday what she posted on? And everyone's talking about it, but because your mum has put this control on that, you're out of it. And that in itself is a challenge, isn't it?
It is really hard. But I would say to any parent listening, be a parent. We're not their friends. And we need to step up, and we need to be willing to incur our children's wrath. It's going to happen anyway. So, you're doing this. This is about safety, and we're all catching up. We're used to saying, we're used to implementing safety, road safety. We're used to implementing where and when they can go out of the house and so forth. We need to step up and do this now with the online environment. And there are many experts out there, and there are many apps and devices, and we're playing catch-ups. And most of my information has come lately from excellent talks that I've gone to at the kids' schools. So it's about retraining as adults.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always liken it to this. This is like us in a toy shop or in a sweet shop, if you like, where we're exposed to this new toy that gives us access to everything whenever we want to, but we haven't quite learnt how to manage it and deal with it. And this is obviously what is going on now in schools and in households for those that are willing to acknowledge it. And there are the early adopters.
Yes.
But there will be, hopefully, the unwashed masses which follow, because the results of it are pretty obvious. I mean, if evidence is anything to go by, current mental health statistics, which we won't go into, but we all know that they are ridiculously high.
Yeah.
And the solution is not medication. Well,
it is not, yeah. In some cases, of course. But for most of us, it's not even nearly the answer. We've got to sort ourselves out at the lifestyle level, which is what you're all about.
Yes. Yes. And one of the other challenges with technology, of course, is its ubiquitous nature. Like, you may have those controls on your phone for your kids.
Yes.
But their best friend might not. So let's go over to so-and-so's place and it's quite frightening, really, because when you look online to see what you can explore, and I'm thinking particularly here for young children of pornography or that in particular, and from that getting a sense of normality about sex and intimacy.
Yeah.
Goodness, we're really setting ourselves up here, aren't we?
Absolutely. And look, hopefully with what's gone on this year, we are becoming more alert to the issues. But this is the problem. Children are getting their sex education from porn, and it's disastrous. It's disastrous for all of the kids involved, the boys, the girls, everybody, because, the many boys are none the wiser that what they're seeing is not how it's done, it's not normal, and they're not going to get the same responses. Physiologically, it's affecting them. They often can't operate sexually in a normal way when it comes to a normal situation because of what they've been exposed to online. And the girls are being subjected to horrendous sexual experience that they may think is normal as well.
Well, the issue of abuse and consent is an interesting one too, and I think, when we look at what's happening in Australia with this parliamentary event or incident with the woman Brittany Higgins, this kind of brings up memories for people that have kind of dampen them down and suppress. I mean, it's really making people hypersensitive and hypervigilant. This is a double-edged sword, really, isn't it?
It really and truly is. So on the positive side, we have these amazing women in Brittany Higgins, Grace Tame and others who are speaking up, and this is off the back of some years of this now, what with the Royal Commission, into child sexual abuse in institutions. And we are speaking more widely about these issues, and it is making our children safer in that sense. Our children now have a language from school that we never had. Yeah. They're able to talk about feeling unsafe and why. You know, at the sports carnival, they are sent to the bathroom in threes, you know, and they have a mantra. What is it? Look, say, go. I can't even remember what it is, but they are told what to do, you know, and one of them goes for help and one of them stays and one of them yells, whatever it might be. This is incredible to me. You know, we had nothing of the sort.
Yes.
And so they are much safer in that sense. And so this is the positive side. Also that we are able to talk about these things. Workplaces are slowly becoming more aware of the safety measures that they need to put in place, but also of what people are suffering, and there's more support available for people who are going through things. On the other side, this is triggering people. People are in a vulnerable state because they're stressed anyway. And the stories are bringing up all sorts of their own experiences. And so people are seeking help to a greater extent, again, which is a good thing. But sometimes they're not accessing the right help or enough help or soon enough. It's pretty tough out there.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're dealing with this issue of technology on the one hand and learning how to harness it. And we're talking about abuse and consent and respect. On the other hand, all of these things have really emerged to, and in a very positive way. These are important conversations. And then along comes COVID.
Wow.
How do you see, what impact has that had on what you're seeing in your clinic?
Yeah, so many different elements. COVID, clearly, you know, really important to acknowledge first that we are so lucky here in Australia compared to others, that many of us have sustained our employment and our livelihood, and so we're lucky on that front, and that we have the health system available that we have. So in many aspects, we're doing very well, and it's really important that we remember that others are not so lucky, and people in Australia as well who have lost their livelihood, you know, their lifelong small businesses and so forth. So there is that. I mean, the other things to point out are that it escalated the stress in people's lives. So, of course, we're aware too, and it's been spoken about in the news, that there was an escalation in risk and experience of people in domestic violence situations, people being stuck at home, all of that. Even as far as people accessing their superannuation, I won't start talking policy, but it's frightening. And, you know, women being coerced by their husbands into accessing their superannuation, and the list goes on that front. But even those not in abusive situations, incredible relationship strain, whether that's born of financial strain or having the children suddenly having to homeschool. All sorts of elements that really tipped people over the edge.
I mean, even within relationships, you know, people, you know, when you're in a relationship, you're with someone. Yes, that's great. but did you sign up to the 24/7 week on, week in, week out arrangement, which either brings out the very best or the very worst in
Indeed.
relationships?
And we know that consumption of alcohol went up. And people weren't able to go to the gym as they might normally have done as a healthy coping mechanism. So there are all sorts of things that went very wrong. I mean, there are all sorts of things that went very right as well. And people did have more downtime. They didn't have their commutes to work. We know that they started taking up baking sourdough and all sorts. So there were some positives, but and I guess the thing to talk about again, just to highlight that, going back to that helplessness or sense of out of control, this is what COVID did for many people. It triggered them into an experience of uncertainty and fear that possibly put pressure on those other elements, cracks in the foundation I talk about, whether it's childhood, trauma or loss that they experienced, or more recently in life, but those pressure points are there. And when something like COVID comes along with all the uncertainty and stress that brings, it leaves people exposed and vulnerable.
And tell me, as a therapist, where patients are coming in, clients are coming in, one after the other, day in, day out, that must take a toll on
Yes.
the individual. What are some of the mechanisms that are in place to protect the health of the therapist?
Okay. There are many, and some of these are up to the therapist. So some of the ones that people might not be aware of is that we all belong to a professional association, and there were myriad emails coming, updating us on, for instance, how to adapt to the online environment for those therapists who weren't used to conducting therapy online. There was upskilling, there was support in terms of what's going on and what we need to know. So there's the professional association. There are also the requirements of ongoing professional development, which is good because we know we have to get a certain amount of hours each year, and that keeps people in the loop and keeps them upskilling and so forth. But more significantly, there's a requirement for a certain number of hours of clinical supervision.
Right.
So all therapists must be accessing a senior trained colleague who essentially is supporting the therapist, keeping an eye out for their well-being, noticing what they may be carrying or how client material may be affecting them, and whether they are supporting them in sustaining the therapist being effective and safe and constructive and so forth in their therapy practice. So that's an important one. Therapists tend to be very conscientious, well-meaning people. Many therapists will do way over and above the minimum requirements of both professional development and clinical supervision. They often have really strong professional networks because it's really important with this kind of work to be able to speak with like-minded people who are aware of the experiences that you have and that can speak in a supportive and constructive way about the work that you're doing. And it's part of the training to be able to self-care, self-manage. Many therapists will be proponents of many of the lifestyle elements that you advocate. And so many of us undertake mindfulness training. And in fact, there's research that suggests that therapists who have done, for instance, an MBSR course, mindfulness-based stress reduction course, are shown to get better client outcomes.
Wow.
So it's not only the benefit of themselves, but to the benefit of their clients. So often therapists have done their own therapy also. So we like to think of ourselves as masters of self-regulation. And I see therapy as a therapist as quite a mindful exercise or practice. I am sitting with a client and their feelings and thoughts, overwhelm, trauma, whatever it means, but I'm also sitting with my own responses and reactions to that and having to regulate in the moment, and be attuned to the impact on me so that I can then digest and process and offer it back, in a sense, in a better digested or in a constructive way, to offer back some understanding from my point of view.
That is, I think that's just such an important thing for people to hear.
Right.
Because I think, the other side of the coin is, what do you say to a person who clearly would benefit from therapy but is very reluctant? I've got my friends, I don't need to talk. Talking, what do you say to people like that? Or what would you say?
Yeah, look, I think it's really hard. I mean, so often what I say is therapy is not for everyone. I think that's a way of letting them know that I'm not going to preach or push. And because it is fact, there will be some people for whom therapy is not the answer just now. It may actually be that they will benefit more from going and doing some yoga or another form of body work, like a martial art or Tai Chi or something along those lines. They may not be ready for therapy, or it might not just be the time for them right now. So for some people, therapy might not be the answer just now. I also will say that it is important that they find the therapy that will suit them best. So I'm always very transparent with new inquirers. And I will explain that there are therapies that are more present focused and perhaps solution focused. They want a therapist who will do some reality testing with them, who will stay with negative thoughts perhaps, and to interrogate those and challenge those, who will do some problem solving, who will consider what the positive resources in a client's life are right now. Now, I may do all of those things, but the way that I work is to take into consideration the client's personal history. I am interested to understand the person's growing up and personal history and family history, because it lets me know the context of how they found themselves here today. But some people are not ready or willing to go there just now. So it's important that they know that if they're adamant that they don't want to talk about the past, I'm not the therapist for them. But I don't want to put them off seeking other help. Yeah. So there are ways to help people into getting some professional help. Again, it might be that they will benefit more so just now from doing a mindfulness-based stress reduction course in a group where people are learning slowly but surely to tune into their body and feel the sensations, to sit with some feelings and thoughts that are arising. That may be a better way in for them.
Jack, yeah, go.
Yeah. No, just to say, However, ultimately, therapy really is a fantastic tool for many people. If they can find their way into the office, often that's one of the hardest bits, to actually dare to give it a chance. And I often say to people, you know, if you decide to give it a go, come along for a session. If you decide that it could be beneficial, think about coming along 4 to 6 times in the beginning and see how you go. That may be enough for now. So I like to ease people in and let them know that there's always a way out. This is their choice, but to give it a go. And if they can find their way into a therapy office, then they will have a therapist. Some people will be ready with their story. Some people need the therapist to ask questions. You know, there are very few therapists who will be so traditional talk therapy, blank screen, that they will force the client to sit in silence and speak when they're ready. Most therapists these days will help the client who needs it to get started. And they will be looking very carefully and observing very carefully at how someone goes in this space. What do they need just now to make it safe? Some people will need you at times to go for a bit of small talk. Again, this is not traditional Freudian approach with a blank screen. Sometimes there is call for bringing the outside world in to make it more safe in that moment. Many therapists will have a multitude of grounding techniques to keep the client in what we call the window of tolerance. We don't want them overwhelmed, because that's not good therapy, nor do we want them under accessed, which means they're going into shutdown. You know, there's fight, flight, freeze going on, and we've got to bring them back into their body, into the room, feeling safe again. And then gently, you know, I will always say to clients, you don't have to go anywhere you're not ready to. I will open the door. I may even dare to shine a flashlight, you know, a torch down into the dark, but it's your choice when you walk through. You know, and there are many ways of working in therapy without having to tip someone over into what they're not ready for.
Well, Jackie, thank you so much for opening that door and shining the light in for us today. It's been great to talk to you. I'm going to have links to your site. There's some great resources on there. And thank you so much. My pleasure. Really good to talk with you. Now, I often ask my guests at the end, what do you think the biggest challenge is for us on our health journey today? But I clearly didn't today. And the reason was pretty obvious, because I think this whole idea of overwhelm and technology is clearly one of the biggest challenges we all have. And I thought it was great to talk to Jackie about the therapist's role and to give us all an insight from their perspective about how they approach the relationship, because they are dealing with people who are vulnerable. But having gone through this on 2 or 3 occasions, and I remember the very first time that I ever did have therapy, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but between my 2 daughters, who are 35 and 31, we did have a stillborn, and my reaction to that was to just get on with life. Let's move on. Let's have another child. Let's, you know, I don't know whether that's typically male, but that was typically me, and my wife was very determined to deal with this more holistically. And so we went for therapy, grief counselling, and that was just a total revelation to me. I resisted it. I didn't want to do it, but it changed my life. And since then, I've had 2 or 3 other instances where I have sought therapy and have had really, really positive experiences. And my take on it is that just the experience of sitting down with a professional who is aware of your vulnerabilities and who listens to you, does nothing else, just the process, the cathartic process for an individual to relate a story to a stranger who is trained and aware of your vulnerability is in and of itself an incredibly positive experience, I think. And then to have that therapist who is trained and experienced guide you carefully through the process of self-awareness and discovery is also a very positive thing. So I really enjoyed talking to Jackie and hearing that all again and reinforcing. And if I had to say, and as she said, it's not for everybody, and there are many other strategies that you can take to deal with emotional stress and build resilience, which is precisely what unstress is all about. Unstress is a made-up word about understanding stress. And our wellness program, Unstress and Simply Be Well, is all about understanding stress and implementing simple strategies to build resilience. So, there is that. Look, don't forget, leave us a review. Got to put in the plug. And don't forget to download the Unstress with Dr. Ron app. And don't forget that there are some wonderful resources coming. I hope this finds you well. Until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health, and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical practitioner. Guests who speak in this podcast express their own opinions, experiences, and conclusions.